Mental performance within military and first responder communities is becoming a valuable tool for health and well-being of high-risk professionals. It's also a strategy to promote optimal performance under intense stress and adversity. These operators, referred to as tactical athletes, benefit greatly from improved stress awareness, focus and attention, and self-regulation techniques such as breathing and energy regulation. This is Neil Wattier with the AMPT Mental Performance Podcast. Excited to bring you the first of my weekly guest episodes. Fridays will be dedicated to short form, quick hitting episodes that you've enjoyed so far. But Mondays will begin 30-minute guest appearances by experts and high performers sharing their education and experience. And today I'm talking to my friend Brian Bishop. Brian is a 12 and a half year veteran of the U.S. Army, where he served in the military police corps as a commander, law enforcement operations leader, and a team member on multiple comprehensive fitness task forces. While serving as a leader at various levels, Brian implemented performance-enhancing mental resiliency and suicide prevention techniques in a high-risk occupation, seeking to optimize performance in stress-inducing, chaotic environments, including combat. As a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and graduate of University of Denver with a Master of Arts in Sport and Performance Psychology, Brian has incorporated his experience in education into his current work within the first responder communities. His approach to optimal performance promotes mental readiness by increasing stress resiliency and facilitating performance flexibility in high-risk situations. In an effort to assist emergency responders in sustaining peak performance and maintaining high resilience, Brian is also completing his MS in military and emergency responder psychology. That's awesome. I didn't know that was a thing. I want to talk to you more about that.
Right on,
And then
right on, for sure.
finally, as the concept of mental readiness and psychological resilience continues to grow and evolve within the high risk community and beyond, Brian's mission is to be on the front lines, incorporating his brand of mental fitness into more agencies, teams, and organizations across the nation. Brian, thanks a lot, man. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. Great to be here, Neil. Thank you.
So yeah, I want to get to that part about the MS in military and emergency responder psychology, because that sounds amazing. But a lot of the conversation that you and I have had has been around the idea of recovery as the foundation of performance. And I know a lot of your presentations, your discussions really focus on recovery.
Mhm.
That seems to be something that people just overlook, discount, and just
Yeah.
generally don't really do well. So
Yeah.
talk to me more about that.
Yeah. So especially within high risk occupations, right? Performance is the most visible and highly emphasized aspect of performance. And really what this comes from is what I call the cycle of performance, and it encompasses three phases. And the three phases are recovery, preparation, and then performance, right? Or recover, prepare, perform. And so typically when I present in front of a group of emergency responders, I'll show them the cycle and then ask them, hey, in this profession, what is the most important phase of the cycle? Almost unanimously, you'll get performance. And why? Because, well, it's the most visible, it's the most evaluated, it's what not only the organization sees but also the public in the service of the community, right, as they perform their duties and go from call to call. And so then I'll ask them, and you'll get a sprinkling at that time of what's the most important phase. Maybe somebody will say recovery, or somebody will say preparation. But then when I ask the question kind of in a different way, hey, looking at the cycle of performance, which phase of the cycle is the most overlooked or underemphasized? Well, everyone in the entire room will say recovery. And you'll start to see the gears turning regarding, experiencing burnout or being overworked, tons of overtime being taken, leadership not really valuing, recovery efforts in the individual, as well as, just a mindset that says that promotes and is trained in that environment often of one of like, hey, you're not really effective unless you're working. You're not really a member of the team unless you're outworking the guy next to you, right?
It's that
And
grind mentality.
that's it. Yeah, right. And so they get hyper focused from the top to the bottom on just show up and perform. And being from the military myself, this was who I was when I was in, right? And so we get into this, and I know you're a veteran as well, Neil. I mean, we get into this mindset of hey, we'll recover when we have time. Well, for me, that ended up being I was forced to recover because on the way out of the military, my bodies just started breaking down, and I got incurably sick. So I got an autoimmune disease on my way out as a result of just running on level 10 high stress for my whole career. And I didn't really realize it until I was forced to make time for recovery. Well, the reality is there were, I think, a lot of different maybe performance breakdowns along the way that I kind of just overlooked that really kind of indicated, hey, you might not be performing at your best as a result of not showing up at your best. Well, we only show up at our best when we've recovered or when we've fully engaged in recovery. So I started to kind of peel back the onion and say, okay, where were some gaps in setting up consistently optimal performance? Well, I started looking at my sleep habits. I started looking at what I was doing when I was off. I started even looking at how comfortable I was being off, right? As I entered this line of work of performance coaching, I started to see those same habits in the very people that were sitting in front of me. A lot of responders weren't comfortable with being off shift. A lot of them would mention just feeling unsettled, sitting at home, right, or being with their family. And in talking with a lot of these folks and even a few military veterans that I knew, we started uncovering that there comes a point where there's an addiction to being on the job, being in chaos, right?
And that's it's that kind of person, right? There's a certain type of person that goes in the military. There's a certain type of person that wants to be a medic. There's a certain type of person who wants to run into a burning building.
Exactly.
And it's funny because you talk to the firefighter community, and what you realize that what I've found out recently is the majority of firefighters calls are not fires. Because a lot of them are trained as either EMTs, some of them even paramedics.
Exactly.
So the firefighters will still go out on some of those calls, and what you get is I want to be a firefighter, but really I'm just a medic. And that it's almost like that. I've heard some people say, well, I don't want to miss a shift because then that's when the fire happens. And of course, this is we all know this is type of career. And we have the military and the first responder community has kind of that weird sense of humor. So when I say things like that, I laugh, I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful. Like nobody wants anyone to get hurt. But we know that it's going to happen. And when it happens, I want to be the one that gets the call, because that's what I'm doing. That's the job. That's what I live for.
Here.
And you get that rush when it happens. So I can see why people, they don't want to miss out because some of them aren't getting the opportunity to really do what they were trained to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens a lot, right? And then, I noticed that, just the requirements of the organization as well play a factor, right? So, a lot of these people are shift workers. And so shifts got to be manned 24 hours a day, right? Whether it's an 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift, or 12-hour shift, they got to put personnel on the schedule to work so that they can serve the community. And so the other side of that, there's the desire to work, and then there's the mandation to work, essentially, right? Hey, we got to fill shifts, so you're being mandated overtime, essentially, over the next. So you're working maybe 3 or 4 doubles in a row, right? And so they start to get used to this as the level of activation that's needed to perform in that optimal zone of natural excellence increases and shifts a little to the right. They need more to get into their optimal zone of natural excellence. And so I talk about that in a lot of my work. And what I'm talking about is that is like the performance curve or Yerkes Dodson performance and stress, right? Intersection. And at a certain level of stress or activation, one reaches their flow state, right? Well, as they first enter the profession, it may be a little bit on the low end, right? It doesn't take much to get us into that stress needed to get into our flow state. Well, over time, that actually moves to the right the more they get used to these high stress situations, right? And so, anyways, what that promotes is, continuing to be there more and more and more, and less used to and less conditioned and comfortable with recovery. And so as we think about the cycle of performance, which it's a wheel, we start to get a flat spot in recovery, because what starts to happen is when the body is physically in bed, at home, relaxing in the chair, eating food, right? The mind is stuck in that perform mode, in that perform phase, right? I'm ruminating on a performance I could have done better, right? I'm concerned about what's coming up next, right? So on and so forth. The cycle continues. And so what happens is I say, hey, let's just skip recovery and just get right back to performance, right? Because that's where my mind is at anyways. So we start to see this disconnect in that recover phase between mind and body. Mind is stuck in performance, body's physically moving through the cycle, each phase, and we start to shortcut it. And so what happens, and what I've unearthed in my work is that optimal performance really starts at quality recovery. And it's been a matter of really getting folks in these professions to get back to and get comfortable with that recover phase through making it much more intentional, much more robust, right? Hey, here's some things that really need to happen in recovery. It's not just a mindless phase to be in. This is actually where the work begins, recover and prepare, right? So we're putting in that mental effort really in recovery. As we look at some of these elite athletes and sports greats, Kobe Bryant is one I use often. What he did off the court is what allowed him to be who he was on the court. We just saw a finished product, but we didn't realize that when he was in recovery and preparation, he was putting in significant, so to speak, effort, right? Now, this is somewhat confusing to folks because you're saying, okay, wait, I just expended my body and performance. You may got to put in work and recover and prepare. No, what we're saying is, or what I'm saying is, you fully engage in it, right? So you prepare for quality sleep. You fuel the body after you just utilized all your energy storages to perform for a 10, 12-hour shift, right? So you're actively refueling the body. You're processing the stressful events that just happened. So your mind is now moving into recovery with your body. You're getting quality sleep to clear out all the mental toxins that you developed in stressing your mind for task execution, right? Maybe you're refining and revising some goals in that recover phase, a long-term recover phase. You are reconnecting with your value system, right? These are some of these things that we kind of get back to in recovery. You're developing your self-talk plan, for example, right? So these are some of the things that have often been overlooked in recovery in these professions, that really that's what I'm getting them back to. It sets them up for better preparation and then flexible and adaptable performance versus muscling through performance. Okay, let's see what today holds. So,
well, and we know that if I go to the gym 7 days a week,
yep,
every single day of every single week,
yep,
we know this. We know that it's not going to happen. It's not going to be productive. I have to have, and even when I was doing really intense CrossFit training, what we found was the best cycle was usually a 3-on, 1 off, sometimes even a 2 off every once in a while.
Yeah,
because
totally.
you would come in and you feel that a lot of times that delayed onset muscle soreness, the day after isn't so bad. It's actually day 2 and 3 that's really, really bad. So sometimes you have to take that, and it's really hard to say, man, like every 2 or 3 months, I'm going to take like 4 days off. And people are like, what are you talking about? You can't do that. No,
Yeah.
really, you have to. And so, I want to pause for just a second because I was
Hmm.
taking a couple notes and a couple
Sure.
things that I thought about. And you said it a little bit differently. I say recovery is the foundation of performance. You said
Hmm.
optimal performance begins at effective recovery. Did I get
Hmm.
that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
or
I mean,
optimal
essentially the
recovery.
same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I remember saying that to somebody. I had a friend of mine that was retiring from the pastoral career field.
Right.
And he
Right.
just kept telling me how he felt so burned out after
Hmm.
35 years of being a
Hmm.
pastor. I'm like,
Right.
but I mean, think about it. How often were you really
Hmm.
recovering?
Right.
And people talk about like they talk about stress management. They're like, I'll
Hmm.
say, what do you do for stress management? Oh, I go to the gym. That's not stress management.
Right.
That is a deeper dive
Right.
into performance,
Hmm.
which now requires additional recovery. So
Right.
we have to be more deliberate with
Right.
the words that we
Right.
use,
Yeah, it's a good point.
because even the idea of stress management, I don't even like using that term, because we're not
Hmm.
managing stress, we're managing our stress ourself in the stressful environment. So
Right.
when I try
Right.
to encourage people to be better, be more intentional about the words that they use.
Yeah.
So you mentioned rumination, and
Right.
I think this is really important because what you see, you talk about that circle of performance,
Hmm.
performance and recovery.
Yep.
Tell me again, there's 3 points.
Recover, prepare, and perform.
There you go. Okay. So
Yeah.
recover, prepare, perform, and then you go back into recover mode.
Right. Yep.
And one thing that I remember you pointing out to me was there's a lot of people, especially first responders, is they'll be off of work, but they'll still
Hmm.
mentally be
Yes.
at
Yes.
the firehouse or on that
Yes.
call or
Absolutely.
something that happened, or they're
Yep.
thinking about, because you got to imagine all the destruction and the
Hmm.
injury and the death. Like my
Absolutely.
wife works in an ER, and
Hmm.
she'll come home and she'll say, yeah, we lost 2 people today. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
they call them codes. They had
Right.
an infant come in as a code
Right.
patient, like meaning that the infant what didn't have breath or a heartbeat.
Yep.
And I'm like, man, the stressful environment, inherently stressful environment, and
Hmm.
you're going to, how do you effectively transition out of that into
Hmm.
recovery mode and allow yourself? I didn't have that stressful of an experience in my military environment. I had my own
Right.
type of stress, but
Right.
that's a
Right.
whole nother level.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
so when we talk about rumination, that makes me really think about when we talk about performance and performance prep. One of the
Hmm.
things we talk a lot about is mental imagery, because
Hmm.
mental imagery is so powerful. Your brain doesn't know the difference between what is real
Right.
and what you
Right.
tell it is real. It's like going to a haunted
Hmm.
house. I know it's fake, but it still scares me, right?
Right. Right.
That's the power of using mental imagery and
Hmm.
simulation to
Absolutely.
build confidence, to
Hmm.
relive past
Definitely.
experiences, and to prepare for future experience. Now, if
Right.
you take that mental imagery and you have somebody who just finished a really difficult 48-hour shift,
Hmm.
and now they're sitting at home ruminating, that
Hmm.
means that their brain is still actively engaged,
That's right.
and so you're
Yep.
not really recovering,
You're not.
because you're using that creative part of your
That's
brain
right.
to continuously relive the
That's
same
right.
thing over and over again.
Yeah. And the body's still in that mode. It's releasing all of those stress hormones still while one may be in bed trying to sleep, right? And so you hear a lot about just kind of sleep disorders, poor sleep hygiene, not full sleep, right? And so like when the mind is not there with the body in recover phase, now the individual is not fully engaged in recovery, right? And so this is why I talk a lot about full engagement in each phase of the cycle, right? And why that and how important that is, and what that even looks like, right? So um are we tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system response, right? Are we able to effectively engage that as we roll into a recovery, or are we still activating that sympathetic response, right? And so there's a lot of neurofeedback, brainwave talk that I do. We're looking at the biofeedback portion of it, and flushing that out. And really we're diving into that recover phase and flushing that out more, because to be honest, if I when I ask an individual who I have, hey, what are some things you do in recovery right now, what are some things that you actively do to recover, It's one of the hardest things for them to actually come up with. I get home and I talk to my family or my boyfriend or friend on the way home from work. Boom. And it's like, I don't know what else I do, right? So it's like, okay, we're not mindful, we're not intentional when we recover. And so what happens is we're hoping for the best when we wake up the next morning and go to shift. Right. And that denotes a huge lack of engagement or significant lack of engagement in that phase. So it's like, okay, well, do you want to perform at your best consistently when it matters most? Yes. Okay, great. It starts at recovery. Right? Period.
That's it. That's a great, okay. And so let's pause for a second. And I want to come back because I want to finish with conversation of, because we tend to get into these conversations, and I say we meaning people in general. Definitely. We talk about, hey, you should do these things,
right?
And then we don't tell people how to actually do that. So let's come back in a minute.
Yes,
right.
That's a good point.
But first, I want you to tell us a little bit about. I'm very interested in this MS in military and emergency responder psychology. So I'm very familiar with psychology. I'm very familiar with sport and performance psychology. I have my Master of Arts in performance psychology, and I'm a mental performance coach.
Right.
You're actually getting a degree in military and emergency responder psychology. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's a global program at CSU. It was developed by Dr. Sarah Metz at who runs Code 4 counseling here in Colorado. And so she developed that program at CSU and opened it up to, anybody who wants to really learn more about this population and becoming a practitioner, counselor, therapist, within this population and know more about them specifically, right? And so a lot of the coursework and the program setup surrounds diving into basically the culture more, some of the clinical health issues that they are experiencing. And I start to make that intersection with like, hey, clinical mental health issue and performance barrier. And so it's a deeper dive into that culture, from the lens of that culture, right? And so her husband was a police chief, 30 years on the force. A lot of students in the program are active responders themselves or veterans. And so it then on the back end of the program, then it really kind of sets you up as you do internships and practicum for the hours needed for being a licensed candidate. And so that was the other strong point of that program is that it sets you up to be to become licensed to also engage through either diagnosis or treatment some of those mental health concerns that, listen, we will come across as performance coaches, and we're especially within this population, right? We're dealing with people who their performance barrier may be a significant mental health issue, not just a confidence issue, right? Confidence because of trauma, right? And so for me, it wasn't just enough to have this really awesome and effective mental skill and say, hey, apply it and it's going to work. There's an extra hurdle with folks from the high stress, high risk background that we've got to get across that we may not have to engage with an athlete. And so that's what that program really helps to unpack for me.
And I think I try to make sure that I communicate. There's an important distinction here within the practice that is not always very well communicated to the people who are not familiar with the differences between a mental performance coach, consultant, practitioner, and somebody who is a licensed counselor, therapist, PhD or master's level, doesn't matter. There is that distinction. So you do have a lot of people in the career in psychology, right? Psychology, medical. I talked to a medical doctor, psychotherapist who works with athletes. And so there's a lot of roads to the profession.
Right.
They're also within those roads have some pretty distinct, not always legally defined, sometimes not even very well ethically defined, but there's definitely meant to be some definition of me as a mental performance coach. I have my master's
Yeah.
degree. I just completed my hours, and I'm going to take the test to be a
Hmm.
certified mental performance consultant. I
Right.
can teach mental skills for high-end mental performance. My role is not to diagnose and treat mental health, anxiety,
Right.
post-traumatic stress, anything
Right.
like that. Nothing
Right.
diagnosable. That's not
Right.
my role.
Right.
Similarly, some people that do have that ability are specialized and trained and have the education to diagnose mental health deficiencies, that
Hmm.
medical model of, hey, something's wrong, let's fix it,
Right.
healing from trauma, healing from
Right.
past experiences, those kind of things. And sometimes those people are also trained in the performance side. A
Right.
lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people, a lot of people tend to creep. And it's
Hmm.
something that I'm not going to judge because their benefit to an individual is still a benefit. But
Right.
it's important for people to understand there's a lot of roads
Hmm.
to this profession.
For sure. Yeah.
If you're going to engage with a professional in
Right.
something like we do, it's important to understand, number one, what are your goals? What do you want
Hmm.
to achieve?
Right.
And then understanding that the people that you're going to work with could have some potential limitations as
For
far
sure.
as helping you, which is why it's
Yeah.
always a good idea
Yeah.
to work sometimes with multiple. That's why some
Right.
first
Yes.
responder communities teams are creating this. There was, I can't remember the name of the department up in Colorado
Hmm.
who has actually created a performance um, department that includes mental performance coaches, strength and conditioning,
Yeah.
physical, like the physical,
South
mental,
Metro, you're talking
emotional.
about?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
they include psychologists and mental
Hmm.
performance coaches. They
Right.
have the whole gamut of all these people who
Right.
can do all these different things. And so
Right.
we're not going to be able to get through all of it. It's just I wanted to be able to help the listeners understand that there's a
Yeah.
lot of people in these helping roles,
Right.
and not everybody does the same thing, and not
Right.
everybody should do the same thing. We all have
Right.
different education and training, and that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I want to bring up, because I think that the education that you already have in sport and performance psychology, now you're doing an additional degree that takes you further down the road
Hmm.
specifically for force responders,
Hmm.
is going to make you more qualified
Right.
to specifically work with that type of client.
Right. Yeah. I think that's well said, Neil. Absolutely. I think that's beautifully said. And that was kind of my perspective in diving into that additional degree program, right? To really make the marketability of what I'm doing from the performance enhancement or performance coaching side more marketable. Like, oh, hey, here's someone who can understand us as they dive into that performance enhancement, right? Um, I see that
But
missing
that's not a
sometimes.
licensed program, is it? So you wouldn't be a licensed. It's still more of a performance side where you're not going to be a licensed mental health counselor, therapist.
So you can
You
pursue
can.
licensure actually after this particular program. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And let me clarify the reason why I'm seeking that licensure is because I'm actually wanting to bring biofeedback into the mix from that performance element. Hey, here's the physiological effects of these mental skills for that tangibility. Biofeedback really wants licensed professionals utilizing that modality of performance enhancement. And
And
so,
when you say biofeedback, you're
mhm,
talking about basically anything that you can measure from the body and
yes,
pull data and analyze it.
that's right. Yep. Yep. So we're
Okay.
looking at HRV or heart rate variability. So when we're talking breath work or mindfulness training, hey, what's the physiological effect the responder is going to be seeing? Now they're like, okay, I will do that kooky breath work or mindfulness training, right? Because they don't. And I did, right? Hey, do breath work. I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's just ridiculous, right? And I've gotten that from responders when I mentioned that. So it's like, okay, how do I bridge the gap between mental skill and effectiveness for optimal performance trained in recovery and preparation? You see what I'm saying? So now I'm saying, hey, on your off time, instead of ruminating about performance, train these skills. Now they see, oh, because heart rate variability means I'm more in that I'm relaxed state, which then allows the mind to function as it needs to when making decisions, activating perception action cycles, so on and so forth.
Got it. Yeah, good
Yep.
stuff. Really exciting, and I
Yeah.
can't wait to hear more about that. And we're definitely going to be talking more about this down the road. So
Yes,
let's
for
get
sure.
back to our
Okay.
other conversation. I want to make sure that
Yes.
we wrap this up appropriately and talk to
Okay.
me about when people you say that you want people to
Hmm.
actively,
Hmm.
deliberately recover.
Yep.
How do people do that?
Yeah. So, where the connection is made to the cycle of performance then is it's predicated on one's routine. And so I really, really wrap everything up. The how to is what is your routine that you intentionally engage in? I.e., hey, what are the specific things you do in that recover phase? What are the specific things you do in that prepare phase? And then what are the things that happen in perform phase that signify to your mind, I'm in that phase? So when you get off shift and say you are an after shift, worker outer, right? You engage in some exercise to just kind of release some of those unused stress hormones after work, which some people do. That signals to your mind, you are now in that, you are starting your recover phase. Okay. And so now there's an intentionality brought into the picture of, hey, I'm not running away from performance, but I'm running towards recovery. So I'm gonna go work out. Maybe I do some low impact, I something low impact. I swim or I hit the elliptical or I hit the treadmill for a little bit. What happens is then the mind, starts to release those endorphins, and now we get from stress state to now more positive well-being state. Then I go home, I get with my family, I do a body scan, some breath work in the car before I hit the road or after I arrive home, right? All these things, or some passive progressive relaxation, all these things start to signal to the mind, I'm in recover phase. But not only is it just passively signaling to the mind, it's actively signaling to the mind, hey, I'm in recovery, so I got to do these things. Now this becomes my routine each and every day to signal, boom, I'm in recovery. Or, hey, laying out my clothes each day, doing some mental imagery signals to my mind, I'm in that prepare phase, right? So I'm starting to visualize, hey, where will I incorporate maybe a mental skill on shift? Where will, how do I, remind myself to perform this task, or, such like that. But these are the things that allow someone to actively engage, mainly even from that cognitive perspective, um, engage fully in each phase. When I do that thing, I'm in that phase. That's
And
my
we talk a
routine.
lot about it makes me think about performers in general. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times I'll go to athletes because athletes,
Right.
even if you're not an athlete, you still understand how things work. We
Right.
talk a lot about pre-performance anxiety,
Right.
pregame jitters, pregame
Right.
nerves. So we
Right.
talk about habits, behaviors, and habits of
That's right.
excellence. I refer to them as a series of switches so that
Mm-hmm.
as you go
Yep.
along, by the time you get to game time, you're hitting
Right.
that last switch. And so
Yes,
you're
right.
perfectly in line.
That's
Your
exactly
mind,
right.
body, emotions,
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, behaviors, everything are in tune. Your energy level is optimized and you're off and you're running
That's right.
at the perfect zone. And you mentioned that earlier, the zone of excellence.
Yep.
Um, the zone of optimal performing, it has a lot of different names.
Right. Right.
Very very technical psychology thing,
Right.
but ultimately what we're talking about is making sure that your mind and your body, thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
behaviors, and emotions are aligned so that you're ready to perform when performance is necessary.
Right.
And so
Yep.
and that can be difficult for first responders where
Mm-hmm.
they when they're on shift,
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily know when performance is going to happen. But
Right.
that's why the recovery is so important,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're on shift for 24 to 48 hours,
Right. Right.
that bell could go off
That's right.
at any
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
You might have just gotten to sleep 10 minutes ago when it's going off again, or maybe you don't
Mm-hmm.
go to
That
sleep
happens. Yep.
because you just came off of a really intense call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you're on that 24 to 48-hour shift, you can
Right.
be on and you can be tired because
Right.
you had a good, solid recovery
Yeah.
and pre-performance routine through
Absolutely.
your habits that allow you
Exactly.
to effectively recover so
Yep.
that you can be on when you need to be on.
Exactly. Bingo. Bingo.
Love
And
it.
so tuning that individual into the intentionality of those habits, really almost even just changes their world. They're like, oh, I didn't realize I do that, or why I do that, right? So now I'm going to do that much more intentionally. And then they recognize those mini recovery opportunities, even if they're on a 24, 48-hour shift, right? When they get back to station, firefighters, this happens a lot, right? Hey, is there an opportunity to recover for about 30 minutes, right? Or 5 to 10 minutes, right? You can. This re-energizes you for when that call comes back in.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, I know that the term mindfulness is thrown around. Mm-hmm. I tend to recently have used more of the term present moment focus, because especially for, say, like a first responder who did just come off a call, they don't know when the next call is going to happen.
Right.
What are you doing in the next 5 minutes to just at least get some kind of recovery?
That's right.
Then when you get to your actual post-performance recovery and pre-performance, you get that dip in the recovery and then back up again. It's all very effective. It's all very healthy, so that you get that effective wheel and there's no flat spots.
That's it. That's what we're going for. Full engagement.
Nice. Yeah, that makes total sense. I love it. And the simplicity, the beauty and the effectiveness is in the simplicity.
That's it. 100%.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man.
Yep.
All right. So we have recovery as the foundation of performance. We need to make sure that we are effectively utilizing recovery cues, recovery habits, and recovery behaviors such as nutrition and sleep. Mindfulness, being with your family when you're with your family. Don't mentally be at the firehouse, because that's not present moment. Be with your family, get your effective recovery, and trust the process.
That's it. 100%.
Bingo. Awesome. All right, man. So what are you working on? Where can people find you? What are you working on that people can check you out?
Yeah, they can check me out on my website, really, as I continue to try to grow that and get that going. But aeementalperformance.com is my website. Have a few, blog post articles on there, different initiatives that I'm bringing into the mix. So check me out on that. I'm not really on social media too much, and I actually got rid of some of my pages, so you won't be able to find me on social media. But so the best place to find me really right now was on my website. Check it out. And I'm continuing to chip away at that thing each and every day to make it something that is foundational and readable to the audience.
Awesome. Dude, I really appreciate your time. This is a great conversation. We didn't even scratch the surface on what we have to talk about. So I imagine that you're going to be back on pretty soon.
Would love to.
And just helping people out, working for that first responder community, which is near and dear to my heart. My wife is a member of it. Both of us are military with the background. I don't imagine very many people who don't just adore firefighters and first responders. How could you not, and wish the best for them? So this is an amazing program, and I really thank you for your time.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Neil. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to AMPT Mental Performance Weekly Podcast, your source for optimal mental performance coaching. I have 2 tasks for you this week. First, choose one action from today's conversation to implement in your life. Second, share this podcast and community with someone who values their mental performance. I appreciate your direct message feedback and would appreciate your online review of the podcast. Your honest rating and review help me improve the show and helps others find our community. Visit Arizona Mental Performance Training on all the popular social media outlets and at ArizonaMPT.com.